Yes, there have been some fairly prominent scholars. It is a minority opinion, but it is a significant minority opinion. It's an opinion represented by some well-known figures of Islamic history, like Ibn Taymiyyah, a 14th century Syrian traditionalist. And this may come as a surprise to some people, and because Ibn Taymiyyah has a reputation of being a staunch traditionalist who maybe takes conservative stances on various issues, but here is taking what some may deem a more liberal stance. And the thing that kind of complicates this discussion is that there are many apologists who will claim that this was not his actual opinion, or that he changed his mind, but actually the evidence overwhelmingly shows that this was his opinion, and in fact was maybe the opinion he expressed in his last treatise before he passed away. And so you have someone like him, his student Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, another very famous figure from the 14th century, would expand on the argument for universalism. Um, Although his case is a little complicated for reasons I don't have time to get into, but he would expand on the argument even and offer 25 arguments for universalism. Uh, as we move into the modern period, we see some fairly prominent figures like Muhammad Rashid Rida, who dies in 1935, who is originally from what we now call Lebanon, dies in Egypt, if I recall correctly. He certainly spent the rest of it, much of his life in Egypt. You have a figure like that. You even have a controversial modern cleric named Yusuf al-Qaradawi. He actually seemed to gravitate. So he and Rashid Rida, the last person I mentioned, tended to gravitate toward this idea. Maybe they were not so definitive, but they gravitated toward that idea. They present the argument for universalism, and they just kind of conclude with, hey, God knows best. But they seem to prefer it. They seem to favor that opinion. And then you also have some prominent Sufi thinkers who advocate either universalism or something close to universalism. For example, you have the very famous 13th century mystic or Sufi Ibn Arabi from Andalusia, or Muslim Spain, or Muslim Iberia. And he would speak of even the people of hell remaining in hell, but actually beginning to find pleasure in hell. So that's what I would call a kind of quasi-universalism. So these are some of the famous figures who have advocated for some form of either universalism or something close to universalism. And I should also add here that here I've mentioned some relatively late figures, right? 14th century, 13th century, and then modern figures. Well, I should clarify that these figures would point to evidence from early Islam to justify their positions. So, for example, Ibn Taymiyyah, the 14th century scholar, he points to reports attributed to the Prophet Muhammad or to his companions that seem to speak of everyone leaving hell and going to heaven. So, and I should clarify, for Ibn Taymiyyah, there is still hell. Hell still very much exists, but it's a hell that comes to an end. It serves a purpose. It's almost like kind of like a purgatory of sorts. It serves a purpose and then it ends, and then everyone spends the rest of their lives in heaven. Of course, you will find some individuals here or there who may even speak of hell being more of a metaphor, or not really existing. But for the majority of universalists that I'm aware of, they speak of an actual hell, but a hell that comes to an end. For those who advocate universalism, there are two typical strategies or two kinds of passages that they will point to. The first is passages that speak of God's overwhelming mercy, or rahmah, the loving mercy. And of course, almost every chapter of the Quran makes reference to this mercy, or is preceded by Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God, the Lord of mercy, the bestower of mercy. And this term rahmah, it actually is related to the term for the womb of the mother, the rahim, which is the center of love and mercy. So, and you have passages in the Quran one passage, for instance, says that God's mercy encompasses all things. It goes on to say, but it is written for those who have faith. But it begins by saying that it encompasses all things. And so you have these kinds of passages, and then you also have hadiths or reports of things the Prophet Muhammad is said or did. And one hadith says that God's mercy overwhelms or overcomes or outstrips, there are different versions of this report, his anger or his wrath. So this idea of mercy overwhelming anger or wrath. And other hadiths that speak of how we've had just a taste of God's mercy in this life. We will see a lot more of that mercy in the next. And again, this idea that there's so much mercy, much more than the wrath and the anger and so on. And then also I'll add to this that there are statements attributed to Muhammad's companions that speak of everyone leaving hell and going to heaven explicitly. Either leaving hell and going to heaven, or just leaving hell. So one or you have either one. And then that's one. So that's one. So the emphasis on rahmah, on mercy, that's one thing that people will focus on. The other thing people will focus on are verses of the Quran that seem to suggest that the time in hell is limited. For example, there's a verse in the 78th surah, verse 23, that says the transgressors will remain in hell for, and the word used is ahqaba or ahqaban, which could be translated as ages, right? So a long time. How long is a single age is something that people debated. There was no clear answer to that. But the general feeling is that some people, the really evil transgressors, will be in hell for a long time, for ages. And one argument here is, why would it say ages if it's forever? You wouldn't use the word, you wouldn't say they'll be there for centuries or decades or years if it were infinite. And then you have verses that say they will remain in hell unless God wills otherwise. So there are a couple of passages like this that come to mind. Surah 6, verse 128, and Surah 11. Surah 11 has an interesting thing. Verses 106 to 108. It's interesting because first you have on the one hand a statement that the people will remain, that the evildoers, the wicked, will remain in hell unless God wills otherwise. God does as he wills. And then it goes on to say that the people of heaven will remain in heaven unless God wills a gift that's never broken. So both say unless God wills, and there's a lot of debate as to what exactly does that mean. Is that excluding the period of time that we're alive in this world? Does it mean that God could remove them at some point, or that things could end? There's a lot of debate, but notice the following line. For hell, it's God does as God pleases, basically. God does as he wills. For heaven, explicitly it says a never-ending gift. So someone like Ibn Taymiyyah and his student Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, they developed this really sophisticated scriptural argument for universalism. And they will point to these passages, and they'll also point to passages that speak of heaven not coming to an end. And say, look, the Quran seems to be a lot stronger on this than about hell. And so they try to make that distinction. So the key passages they point to are passages that emphasize mercy and passages that speak of punishment being finite. Now, this raises, of course, the question, why is the Quran not explicit on this issue? Because they're arguing, and these are traditionalists, mind you, Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, they are traditionalists. So presumably they take the letter of scripture very seriously. So the question arises, why does the Quran not address this explicitly? Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah has a statement where he basically says that, this idea that everybody goes to heaven, this is for those, who are blessed basically by God to see this. That it's not something that's obvious, that's immediately apparent. You need to have a deep level of insight to reach this conclusion. And one may speculate as to why, using that logic, that line of thinking, why that would be the case. One way of thinking about this is that if people hear that everybody goes to heaven, then there may be this kind of, this attitude, well, what's the point of doing, of doing good and striving hard, and, if we're all going to end up in heaven anyway. And of course, the response to that would be, well, it's still a challenging, it's hell is still, bad. It's not a good, even if it's temporary, it's bad. But in any case, the logic then is that it's not obvious, but it's there for those who see the hints. I gave a presentation in Amman, Jordan in 2005 on this issue. And in the audience, there was a woman who said she was Christian, and I believe she was a Dominican Catholic. And she said that in her congregation, in her parish, that this is what she was told, actually, that it was like kind of like a secret thing, like don't tell. So apparently this is a thing, not just in Islam, but in Christianity, that some groups will adopt this belief, but also kind of present it as, this is not for the general public, that this is for those who have reached a deeper level of understanding. There's an extent to which universalism is appealing for those who may grapple with certain philosophical challenges, like the problem of suffering and the problem of evil. And if you invoke the possibility that in the end every single person arrives in a state of contentment, and that all this suffering and evil served a purpose, actually, it was not just for the sake of punishment or causing harm or what have you, it does resolve in the minds of many certain philosophical challenges. And I find that when I give presentations on, and I have to be clear, I myself try not to advocate for any of the positions I present. I'm trying to, I am a Muslim, but I try to present these opinions from the perspective of as a historian. And I find that there are people who are really taken by some of these views, these universalist views. And they find it inspiring, the idea that every single human being, there's goodness in every human being. Whether that goodness is apparent, it's there, or it's latent, like it will manifest later. But the point is that there's goodness in everyone. And I think there are many people who find that appealing. The issue of universalism it's interesting, again, because it is a minority view in Islam, but there's a significant minority there with some really prominent scholars. And I suppose the same could be said of Christianity. I don't know, but that would be, so I think it's interesting that it's a minority opinion, but a significant minority.